everyone in Nigeria and the rest of the world. I am Gimba Umar and this is State of the Nation. Now, most of the statement made last week by the Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, about the power sector are false. That's according to the electricity distribution companies, the DISCOs. They said on Tuesday that comments made by the minister on metering, power generation and transmission capabilities and stranded electricity, among others, were significantly distorted. Mr. Fashola had briefed journalists on the status of Nigeria's power sector at headquarters of the Federal Ministry of Power, Works and Housing and identified a lot of lapses on the part of the DISCOs. Well, in the face of all of this, protests have been held midweek by residents in Lagos, in Benin City and in Minna, the Niger State capital, demanding better services from the DISCOs. Chudu Ojukwu is a power sector and utility regulation analyst and economist, as well as a lawyer. He joins me now from our Abuja studios. I want to thank you so much indeed for coming on State of the Nation at this time. Now, going by the recent comments of the minister, he said it is the DISCOs after privatization that now have the responsibility to supply power to the consumer, provide meters and collect the money. Does that bring to rest the concerns of revenue collection by the DISCOs?
To your question, the electricity remains an infrastructure. Now, the distribution companies are private sector people who have taken over to provide this service. Their taking over does not absolve government of some of its key roles in that sector. The government continues to have a substantial role to play. There is a clear demarcation in the electricity policy between what the distribution companies, generation companies, government, the regulator are to do under the reform program. As you know, the reform program is a means to an end, not an end in itself. What you have witnessed recently has been some default on part of key players in advancing the reform, or some distortion of the reform program, leading to general dissatisfaction by a broad spectrum of consumers and even the operators themselves. You know, I listened to the minister's press briefing. Whilst he raised some points, it was generally disappointing that he did not seem to address the core issues that were troubling the power sector. Most of the statements that I found in that press statement of his are more or less issues that will rather exacerbate the situation, not correct them.
Which particular issues will that be?
Well, there was, he made such very egregious statements like distribution companies don't have, exclusivity of the areas in which they operate. What he brought squarely to question, what did they buy if they did not buy exclusivity? I mean, I was part of those who designed the power sector reform in Nigeria and even the privatization program. It was clear what was being sold. It was clear what was being given or licensed. To at this stage now turn around and say they do not have exclusivity because you are experiencing some challenges with the sector, it runs counter to the kind of contracts Nigeria has entered with these people. And it also is discouraging to future investments, because if there's no certainty as to what a person is entering into when he goes into contract with government, it means that at any point in time, you are bound to change rules drastically in a manner that is destructive to business.
Okay, now, the minister also talked about eligible customers in his submissions. How will that consolidate the operations of the DISCOs? Because a lot of people really want the success of the DISCOs to come through so that electricity supply doesn't become much of a challenge anymore.
Eligibility, the eligible customer concept, unfortunately has been distorted by what by the policy directions issued by the minister and being implemented by the regulator currently. Eligible customers are part of the overall design of the power sector reform. but the timing of the declaration is what is an issue, really. It is designed to come in at a time when the market had matured. At this time, no electricity market has been created at all. So to seek to introduce eligible customers into a situation where there was already some regulatory confusion was, to my mind, just trying to further worsen the chaotic nature of some of the missteps that have occurred in the past. I would have expected that the core thing that everybody will be looking to address right now is how do we change the revenue profile of the sector such a way that things will begin to work, not with anybody commanding it, but just the market itself will start to operate at a rational level.
So what's stopping that? Well, permit me to just jump in there. If you say you want to see that happen, what is hindering it from happening?
Well, there are several conditions that are critical to creating a market. A conducive regulation, if more or less the government needs to step back from trying to hold tight to tariffs. In any reform process, there has to be a period where if you really wanted to create a market, where you allow the market decide the rates, not you trying to force rates on the market. But if you decide to intervene and force rates on the market, you must be able and willing to pay huge subsidies. You remember how Nigeria went about the reform in the telecom sector. From the beginning of the reform, the government did not set out to regulate rates. The market itself, it was highly market-driven. By the time the government began to step into regulation, the market has stabilized. Now, from day one, you want to hold on tight to tariffs. You don't want them to reflect the realities of the market. You don't want to take those steps that will show up confidence in people. People need to see payment disciplines. They need to see that cash flows are maintained over time. That's what will drive investments in this sector, not any rhetoric, not premature declaration of eligibility. The problems that the discos face will be faced by any person, whether it's an eligible customer or not, because those problems are inherent in the current situation of the industry.
Let's talk about metering and funding of the discos. 32 billion naira, we understand, meant for metering and funding. What's the status now? Why are the discos unable to provide those prepaid meters to start with?
Well, metering has been a complex problem in the distribution network because of the lack of meters over time. There's a very huge metering gap. The gap is not a small gap. And, there's a revenue requirement for the discos annually as approved by the regulator. And if you look at their capital cost or the capex approved for them, it is not enough to even provide meters, talk of make other improvements in the sector. So when we want to meter aggressively and we also, the realities of the market is that there's only so much any person can do at each particular year. Distribution companies cannot exceed their, capex because it means they can't recover it according to the tariffs that are already approved. Government seeking to intervene in metering may be a good thing, but it is how they will go about it that will be really critical. I hear numbers are being thrown about 32 billion intervention. It is not clear how they intend to apply that intervention in terms of providing metering for people. There have been several government interventions in metering that have failed in the past. It is hoped that this will not be one of them.
But what the minister said is that now, after the privatization process, the discos have that responsibility to provide those meters and ensure that they collect the monies accrued from it.
Yes, indeed. There is a performance requirement for the distribution companies to meter people, but it's according to a plan. The plan is not is different from the political objectives of the government. If you look at their performance agreement, the number of meters they are required to deploy each year, the question will be, have they deployed those meters? As against the metering gap, there's quite a distance between the metering gap and what the performance agreements require. Now, yes, it's their primary responsibility, but that primary responsibility is tied to the ability to assess cost recovery. If the government has held down the tariffs such that they cannot make those investments, it will be foolhardy to also hold them accountable for not providing meters. you can't speak from both sides of the mouth. You can't say, I won't allow you collect money to finance your business, then I also want you to finance that business. It is actually in the interest of the distribution companies to improve metering because their energy accounting is dependent on that. If they don't have a good metering system, they will always lose money. So I don't think that it is in their interest to sabotage or to refuse to meter people. It's actually in their interest to do that. What you have seen is a systematic challenge which they cannot overcome by fiat. They cannot just command meters into place.
Even though increasing tariffs will have to mean that there's a commensurate supply of electricity so that people have confidence in the system. But you being part of that privatization process in 2013, what exactly has gone wrong?
Well, I think it's deviation from plan. That is principally what has gone wrong. People have deviated from the plan. There is no institutional memory as to what exactly was designed. So people have come to interpret the reform in the way that suits them. And what you have in this wake is that promises have not been kept. Government has dilly-dallied on its own obligations. The privatization did not remove government from or did not absolve government from certain obligations. There were primary conditions that they were supposed to fulfill going forward under the program, but they failed in almost every one of them. The regulator has in his own right produced very inconsistent regulations throughout that period.
I must thank you.
It has taken more than 2 years to appoint a chairman of the Regulatory Commission. And
I'm afraid that that's, I do sincerely apologize and thank you also because that's the much we can have from you. He is indeed Chudu Ojukwu, who is a power sector and utility regulation analyst. We'll go on a short break now. When we return, we'll focus on some of the submissions of the presidency. On Friday, he of course took a swipe at some leaders who recently faulted Mr. President's administration and the way it's handling security. Join us again.